the 16th of March 2022. I'm Dana Durnford, and also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589. We're going to cover an earthquake that happened 10 hours ago. And so it's very early in the morning in Japan. All the damage certainly hasn't been assessed. And casualties and injuries are 3 dead so far, and my heart goes out to the victims. Almost 100 injured. They were calling it a tremor. Does that sound like a tremor to anybody? I tremble every time I see this picture. There's 14 prefectures I was hoping was going to snap off and drift out to sea. After everybody evacuated, of course. And that way Japan can get their life back and stop poisoning 7 billion people with radioactive food. But wishes are just that, they're wishes. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean is incredibly polluted. We're worried about, from Fukushima, of course, we're worried about reactor 3, 4, 1, 2, and reactor 6 and the common spent fuel pool falling down, so to speak, and releasing massive radioactive plumes that will contaminate the planet again. This is one of Fukushima's infamous radioactive plumes covering the planet. This model is based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. So when you look at these buildings, that's reactor 3, which was a mixed oxide fuel facility to the left. It's only a stump now. And reactor 4 to the right, which is just a stump now, they had 810 tons of fuel in their reactor cores and decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings. It's shaking in Sendai. I'll turn it down. I'll play that little piece again in a second. This is quite a ways away past Fukushima. Do you see that flash one more time, I guess? Yeah, that was a real flash. Yeah, a real big one, Dana. Some people are calling it an earthquake flash. I've heard that over the years. I don't know if that's true in this instance until Japan tells us like that's going to happen. Resulting destruction. So with one more quake, Japan will cease to exist. And what they mean is the radioactive fallout will cover the planet, but ground zero is going to be bad, baby. Resulting destruction will take half the planet with it. This is what they mean. Once it's covered in radiation, that's it. It's pulsing energy every second. All the insects, bacteria in your forests are sterilized or annihilated. It can only get worse. So that's what they mean by resulting destruction. And Japan will cease to exist. It'll be too radioactive to stay there. It's a metaphor, but it is true in a metaphor way. And that the destruction could take half the planet with it. Now, the reason we're invoking that is because the buildings obviously are fragile. You can't physically go in these nuclear meltdowns. They're very fragile. Would anybody argue with that? How's the poll? We got a poll going tonight. Can the Fukushima nuclear meltdown release large amounts of radiation after a massive earthquake? And the correct answer is yes. 31 votes in, 94% unequivocally tells us that is so. So we're worried about this building collapsing. Have a cover over it, but it's still fragile. It's the same with reactor 3. They have a cover over it. The story's a bit more twisted than that, unfortunately. And so I'll explain that in a few moments. First, I want to talk about why I'm using this as an example. So Japan's had earthquakes before. Okay, so you had an earthquake that was a 6.6. I'll show you here. In 2018, which is what on the Japanese scale, which is 7. So you divide 7 into 10 in the Richter scale. You divide 7 into 10, you get 1.4. Then you multiply that by the Japan scale to get the international scale, because why make it simple? So we're worried about these buildings and quite a few other reactors melting down. So in 2018, the Kyodo Eastern, which is where my finger basically is there, earthquake. I want to use this as an example before we start telling the story today, because we got 400 clicks like this to get through in the last 8 hours that I've been working on it. Registered a maximum of 6.7 on the Japanese maximum intensity scale of 7, known as the Shindu scale. So 6 out of 7 on a 10. There was over 130 aftershocks. There's a lot of aftershocks right now. People are being injured by the aftershocks. They're saying you could get large aftershocks even a week after. In fact, this earthquake was preceded by 6.5 or something just 2 minutes before their version of a 7.3. We'll talk about that. Registered a magnitude of 6.7 on the maximum intensity of 7. So when you do the maths, it's a 9.5 on the Richter scale. And okay, so prove, Dana, that it was a 9.5. Okay, well, give me a second. I'm getting to it. Shish, pushy. My goodness. That's okay. I like pushy. Pushy is good. So in 2018, a 6.7. This is what it done. Which is what you had today, was a 6.7, by the way. I'll put this on the big shut screen, for everybody to make it easy. So lots of damage in the communities, but the landslides will probably intrigue you. So that's up close, and that's a little bit far away. You're seeing huge landslides on both sides of the mountains. All sides of the mountains. Do you remember ever seeing anything like that before? That was just a measly little 6.6. So Japan has this history of lying. Now, where this earthquake happened, that they call it a 6.6, was actually you see where the nuclear power plant is too? It was about 20 kilometers away. The X and the red are ground zero, which is right by the nuclear power plant. But this one was on land. But nevertheless, it was a 6.6. They refused to acknowledge any of this, by the way, for some bizarre, freakish reason. And you've never seen pictures like this in this particular earthquake, I bet. This was a 9.5, not a 6.6, even though that's what they told you. 6.7. Sue me. So up close, you can see how small the people and the vehicles are. And then when you look at all the mountains, as far as you can see in every direction, lost their payloads off the side of the mountains, you really got to wonder, what else have they lied about? So that was just a little tiny, itty-bitty 6.6, just like they got today. But it wasn't. It was a 9.5, and they hid it from you in 2018. So don't be surprised if these have collapsed and radioactive plumes are headed our way because that's what happened, and they hid it from you already. So this is another model of the radioactive plume that came out of Fukushima originally. We're worried it'll do it again. And we have good reason to worry, and I'll show you that documentation coming up because I'm too stupid not to get a radio show, and that way I don't have to do all this work and evidence and all the time. Because that would be pretty smart. And so, I can't remember if this was Tokyo or not. This is shaking. Now, they've seen that, what they call violent shaking, worse than that, in Tokyo. A couple of 100 kilometers away. Japan's earthquake knocks out power to millions. So I'm just going to run you through the first couple of hours. I'm not going to, because after a few hours, actual information starts coming out, right? But here was the original story, and that's important because they're covering up something, obviously. That the only way to, it's best to show you the evidence, you can make up your own mind, but it's also the story of the last 10 hours. So I jumped up on the news cycle that was coming out and tried to aggregate as much as I could each hour of new material, obviously, right? Including the area devastated by a much larger quake in 2011. So you got to remember, like I'm gathering information up. So not everything is super important, but everything is super important as it's happening, because you're trying to figure out what the story is, and then you're going to look for discrepancies and stuff like that. So a Tsunami Advisory, and they do this even if it's not on the tectonic plate. If they have an earthquake up at the top of the mountain, they'll say there's no Tsunami Advisory. They say, of course not, stupid. It was on top of a mountain in the middle of the country. There was no Tsunami Advisory at this time. Please stay tuned. Because they don't want you to think about how dangerous it actually is. Because otherwise you'll get rid of nuclear in a heartbeat, hopefully. Earthquake was centered off the coast of Fukushima region at a depth of about 40 miles. 40 miles. It was actually, most people now the consensus is 36 miles, and so we got hindsight to help tell this story. But they don't tell you how far off the coastline. It took quite a few hours before you got a single report, and that was from AOL of all friggin' media. I didn't even know they existed anymore, but hey, there they do. Video online showed people's homes shaken in the capital, which is Tokyo. And videos, TEPCO, which is dissolved because it's nationalized because they went bankrupt, so the government runs it, but they still call themselves TEPCO, which is not true because the homeless does it. Daiichi's nuclear power plant where multiple nuclear meltdowns said workers found no abnormalities at the site. Now this is within about 90 minutes. These sites are, square miles. Very complicated, multiple nuclear meltdowns. You're going to go up and poke around and say, which is really interesting because you can't quantify that statement, there is no abnormalities. And why would you include that immediately is another question. How come they don't mention the gas plants or coal plants or oil plants? Are they bigoted? Are they racist? I don't know. Chief Cabinet Secretary said there was no abnormalities at the two other nuclear power plants. Now, every single story mentioned that. Yeah, but no damage to the nuclear power plant. Every single story worldwide. They had a massive earthquake, it was powerful. But no damage to any of the nuclear power plants, according to the nuclear regulatory authorities. The ensuing nuclear catastrophe was formally blamed for only one death. It was only blamed because let me give you a quick explanation of how dubious that claim actually is. And you'll see that everywhere, by the way. That's highly contested, that particular death. But in reality, extreme increase in mortality caused by heart diseases and the death rates might give the creeps to some people. Might give the creeps. Just a single community in the Fukushima prefecture had an excess of 12,700 extra deaths by heart attacks and strokes in a single month. Just try wrapping your mind around that statement. Radiation causes death by heart attacks. The radiation, a lot of the gamma will sequester in the heart muscle where it's pulsing energy at the speed of light, which is obviously not good. Japan's air self-defense forces dispatched fighter jets because, it was just a lousy trimmer, Dana. So there were reports of fire, damage to buildings, and fallen rocks in Lydia town, which is, you eat the food there, it's a disease factory. He urged residents in the affected area to use extra caution for a possible major aftershock for about a week. Yeah, but it's just a 7.3, then it's way off the coastline, so 7.3. But what you'll start seeing as I start moving through this is that's the Richter scale. Japan likes to use their own scale, which is upper 6. Not a 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4. That's nonsense when it comes to Japanese. It's lower 6 or upper 6. And there's a big difference, in each point. But hey, we're Japan, we're special. Leaving 2 million without power and California safe from a tsunami. Very salacious headline, safe from tsunami. Plunging more than 2 million homes in the Tokyo area. Now this was 45 miles off the coastline and about 36 miles deep from the nuclear meltdowns. You remember the nuclear meltdowns? Hell number 1 and hell number 2. This is lethal doses. If we call it Medusas. Just looking at it will kill you. 36 miles below the sea. Now, the March 11, 2011 tsunami was on the same parallel of the coastline within there's some discrepancies I noticed in the media out there, but it was on that same fault lines where this earthquake was. It was just at a slightly different depth, and when it comes to tectonic plates sliding under each other, you displaced water, right? That's what the big ones will do. They'll slide off and displace the water of, say, 200 kilometers, and that water will rush in at 400 or 500 miles per hour. And there'll be many of these waves, one after another, generated in a short distance. Tokyo, where buildings shook violently. So if buildings in Tokyo, several hundred kilometers away, are shaken violently, how much are these shaken? Apparently, every community around this place shook except for these reactors. That's the official story so far today. Everything else is, I'll show you. 36 miles below the sea, Tokyo, the quake shook large parts of eastern Japan. Actually, 14 prefectures lost power. And you can't shake Tokyo without shaking all the other prefectures in between it. Because we have this bizarre thing on the planet called laws of physics, where buildings swayed violently. This is original reports. They're super important in any major cover story, and this is a major cover story, unfortunately. Huge, huge, massive, powerful. These are the words you're hearing. Earthquake triggers tsunami alert. 2 million homes loses power. Was central off the coast of the Fukushima region at a depth of 60 kilometers. Over and over and over, they don't tell you how far off the coastline, just the depth. And it fluctuates back between kilometers and miles per hour. Calls have been inundating the police and ambulances in Fukushima and Miyagi, which were the two hardest hit prefectures, by the way, was Fukushima and Miyagi. Therefore, Tokyo violently shaken. How bad could it have been at ground zero, where Medusa 1 and Medusa number 2 are ready to kill off the species on this planet? Warned residents of possible strong aftershocks over the next week. Major aftershocks often happen a couple of days after the first quake, so please stay away from any collapsed buildings. Now, last year they said there was no damage. It was 10 days before the anniversary of the multiple nuclear meltdowns, and they claimed it was a 7.3. But a week later, the headlines were coming out. There was 9,000 houses damaged, buildings, and a couple of months later, we caught an insurance post where they paid out over $1 billion to 30,000 claims. So they're perpetual lawyers. That's what they are. And we're just trying to figure out the truth. So the X up there marks the spot, but they're very reluctant. It's very difficult to find anybody that is telling you the time. 200 mile per hour bullet train derailed as 7.3 tremor. But obviously this is not a tremor. And we cover these earthquakes all the time. We don't hear the word tremor, but that narrative started to change to tremor quite a bit, as you'll probably notice coming up. Train between Fukushima and the city of Shiroshi. So it was close to Fukushima. The train went off the tracks way far away from the nuclear meltdown. So the earthquake had to rumble past the nuclear meltdown, knock the train off the track, but didn't damage anything at the nuclear meltdown site in these fragile buildings. Okay, I guess that's the truth. That's the truth, is it? A fire alarm was also heard at the Fukushima Daiichi plant following the earthquake. And they'll start naming names coming up. Reports of blackout in different prefectures. It was 14 prefectures. Authorities warned residents in Fukushima, Miyagi, Yamagata prefectures to expect aftershocks. And the reason you get aftershocks, and this was the tsunami warning in blue, and advisories in yellow. A writer who lives in Japan tweeted, really big, earthquake in Japan. We're fine, but it was shaking pretty darn hard for like a good 2 minutes. If you've ever been in an earthquake, that's a long time. Indeed it is. Now, what was really going on was they had a 6.5, we'll get to it or so, earthquake 2 minutes before that. So they actually had probably 4 minutes or 5 minutes of actual shaking. And you'll understand it as we get to it, because nothing like evidence to tell the story, is it? Powerful 7.3 magnitude earthquake. Over and over and over, we see the international scales. I kind of ignored the tsunami because I knew there was no tsunami by the time I jumped on the story. The agent, but it was still there always. And even right now, if you check, you'll see tsunami. The agency said the quake struck 36 miles below the sea. They don't tell you how far off the coastline again. And over the last couple of years, they normally won't even tell you that much. You got to go through like 50 stories to figure out how far off the coastline. They might give you the GPSs though. That's a new thing we've seen just in the last couple of years. Because normally, anywhere else you got an earthquake, it was 25 miles off the coastline, 10 miles deep. Wherever it's to, that's how they'll tell you, right? Not Japan though. Japan's like, no. We're telling nobody nothing. Well, they told so many lies, they can't keep track of it anymore, so they don't want to say anything. 7.3 magnitude earthquake hit the coast off the Fukushima prefecture. The depth of the quake is 60 kilometers, 37 miles, and that usually is 36. That one's 37. But you're seeing this consistency, and there's different facets to each story, but they'll have this other stuff that always gets laid over the story that is consistent. Magnitude 7.3 earthquake, and a lot of them will start off with powerful and magnitude, blah, 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 blah. But it's always basically, the original stories will have a lot of similarities, but will have slightly different connotations. So, if you divide 7 into 10, the Richter scale is 1.428, 1.43 or something. Means that earthquake they had down there was basically a 9.4. Because they're calling it a 6.6, 6.7 on Japan's intensity scale of 7. So I'm calling it a 6.6 in this one. So I ended up with a 9.4 in the Richter scale, which adds up. Right? Now it makes sense. Estimated upper 6 in Japan's Shindo scale of 7. Japan's Shindo scale of 7. Because it's very confusing for most people. Because it's very difficult to come across that facet of the information. It's a 6.6, right? Upper 6. And they won't even call it a 6.6. They call it an upper 6. Which means it's over 6.5. So I took the lowest common number, was a 6.6. Just so you know how, for the rest of it, how I'm referring to everything. Residents in some towns in Miyagi prefectures were told to evacuate. And I'm still not understanding if that was from the tsunami they were expecting or from something else. Because Miyagi has a nuclear power plant there. Ino's holding, and they're very vague about any information so far in the last 10 hours on why they evacuated. Ino's holdings and operations in its oil field plant were halted. And so what you're looking at, you're trying to find out if this is very far, was a lot of power distributed through a large percentage of the country. So that kind of stuff, they're shutting down major industries. You want to know where it was shut down. Was there damage? You're trying to get to the truth, which is really difficult when it comes to the media for some reason. They tell you everything but the truth. No, can't tell you that. Powerful earthquake hits northern Japan. The word powerful was there an awful lot. 7.3 struck off the coast of Japan's northern shores near Fukushima prefecture. No, it was right in the center of Fukushima prefecture. Wasn't near it. We got another little video for you. Oh, this was Sendai. This is quite a ways away from the nuclear reactors. The earthquake had to go past the reactors to do this at Sendai. Right, so they had to go past. I'll turn the sound down. I got that on replay there right now. So they had to go, that earthquake had to go all the way past. Hang on, I'll bring in. Had to go all the way past these fragile reactors for 60 kilometers, I think it is, to Sendai. Sendai can do that. There's no harm to the reactors. Dana, fear-mongering. Nuclear scientists all over the world right now are banging on their mom's basement. Mom, come down. Dana's making fun of nuclear scientists again. Make them stop. M7.3 quake in northeastern Japan. Tsunami advisory for Miyagi. So it could be tsunami. They evacuated. But once it was cancelled, why didn't they let them go back? The quake measured 6 plus on the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 0 to 7 parts of the Miyagi prefecture, which means it's a 9.4. The quake measured 6 plus. So that's a 9.4 on the international Richter scale. Tsunami alert issued after 7.3 magnitude quake hits northeastern coast. Oh, Mari Yamaguchi. You remember Mari Yamaguchi? She's been around a while. Here, let me give you an example of Mari Yamaguchi. Let's go way back to 2013. How about that? Right quick. Nothing's quick around here. I stopped being quick about 2 decades ago. Hang on, I'll get there. Here we are. We're already there. Mari Yamaguchi. Mari Yamaguchi. Right here. 2013, Mari Yamaguchi. Talking about the tanks at Fukushima. She said there's 1,000 tanks there in 2013. Oh, Mari Yamaguchi, 2014. She says there's 1,200 tanks there in 2014. In 2022, there's only 1,000 tanks there. Let's get back into the other stuff, because, hey, the truth doesn't really matter anymore, does it? Powerful earthquake strikes off the coast of Fukushima. Again, we're seeing all the major media coming out immediately, using very salacious headlines. The Tokyo Company, which doesn't exist, by the way, because it went bankrupt, which operates the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant, which that's a joke and a half. The place has destroyed multiple nuclear meltdowns. It's only the homeless, the destitute, and the victims of society, the immigrants that they tricked and deceived and coerced into going there. Tokyo Electric ain't going there. Said on Wednesday, the workers the homeless had found no abnormalities at the site, which is in the process of being decommissioned. And we've seen that all day in the last 8 hours. So there was also no abnormalities at 2 other nuclear power plants in the area. And I'm not going to bore you every story by repeating this because they did. They don't mention oil or gas or coal plants, but nuclear, there's nothing wrong. Eat more Japanese deadly radioactive food. Reported that a fire alarm went off the turbine buildings at the number 5 reactor. The number 5 reactor was right alongside the number 6 reactor. 5 and 6 are separated. I'll show you a picture. Why does... The problem with me is I'm like a pack rat. I got so much information that when I want to find something, there's no hope of finding it. So I always go to the old reliable. Come on, man, don't let me down now. Okay, I got it. Woohoo! These were pictures that were released last January. And nobody talked about these pictures. These pictures were taken from a drone. Now, what I'd done was, there were 736 pictures, and I'd done video, and I put it up in my playlist on the front page of the 736 pictures. So I zoomed in, and when I zoomed in, I couldn't believe what I was looking at, because everything was pixelated. Let me get my big head back in there again. Hang on. There we go. I got 2 of me. How bad can this be? So behind me is supposed to be reactor 3, and right there is reactor 4. I'm going to show you reactor 6, hang on, and reactor 5. But this is what is reactor 4. And behind reactor 4 was the common spent fuel pool with around 10 plus million pounds of reactor cores, older reactor cores, from all 6 reactors. So that's pixelated completely out. And to give you some context, I'm zooming in on it. When you look behind this building, you'll see the transport truck containers behind it. That gives you context of size. And this got pounded with the tsunami. Hang on, I still got to get the reactor smurfed up. Don't worry, I got it. Here we go. It's a little tricky doing what I do sometimes. Okay, here we go. This might look a little blurry to you. Their picture's not mine. So this is almost to reactor 5 and 6. You can see the tanks are just twisted apart. And they're about the same height as the common spent fuel pool, by the way. So as you start going towards, that's 5 and 6. Up there, 5 is the closest one. So that's 5. But look alongside of it at reactor 6. And we've never seen this before. 6 is pixelated. And so is, this is the turbine building they're going to talk about right now. And that's the turbine building for reactor 6. But 6 is completely pixelated out. I think that obviously something happened at 6. Why would you pixelate the building out? On the way there, there's this structure here. This is the dry cache storage. And you can see a lot of damage, and you can see the way it's built. So the tsunami would have came in and ran through it and back out again, right? It's very dubious, that whole... Yeah, let's get back over to this one. Okay, that one. And so I showed you 5 was the only building. The rest of them are pixelated. You can't see it so much in these pictures. And we got to keep going because we got a lot to get through, unfortunately. NHK said, but you can look, see all those pictures, they're in my playlist. Done a presentation on all of them with the documentation to help you wrap your mind around it. Said that there were reports of fire damage to buildings and falling rocks in the town of Lydia, which is way past the nuclear meltdowns. We're worried about the nuclear meltdowns. I got to go back up and copy that one again. Because what I do is I copy paste this one as I need it. This is kind of a go-to for the conversation tonight. But we got detail coming up of all 4 reactors coming up in a little bit. NHK said there were reports of fire damage to the buildings, It shook large parts of eastern Japan, including Tokyo, which is long way past the Fukushima ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns, right? And so we're worried that they're going to give up the ghost and release and go into what's known as a recriticality, where they're consuming steel and rebar that's going to fall in on it because of the meltdowns. So that part of it's a bit complicated for everybody. I get that. If you go back and go to my playlist, you'll find what is Fukushima type videos, where I tell you the whole story in a neat package. Express train partially derailed between Fukushima and Miyagi. And we covered that a little earlier. Tsunami warning 7.3, quake trigger and fire alarms at the nuclear plant. Plunging millions into darkness and buildings rocking in Tokyo. So we're seeing damage far, far away past the nuclear meltdowns, but they're saying it's not even up an extra Beck wall an hour. atomic decay an hour. Meanwhile, skyscrapers and other buildings in the capital, Tokyo, rocked during the latest quake to hit the country. The epicenter was off the coastline of Fukushima. Also triggered a fire alarm at the turbine building at Reactor 5. And I showed you Reactor 5 just now, the turbine buildings. So 7.3 off the coast between Fukushima and Namie. So they're saying it's off the coastline of Namie, but Namie's 15 kilometers north of Fukushima nuclear meltdowns on the same coastline. And this was a major earthquake reporting site. They called it a major magnitude earthquake. They're going off the USGS's rocks northern Japan Tsunami Advisory issued. Now, what they're showing you here is the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 7 is the red, the dark red. The light red is a 6 lower. So you're talking about an 8.5 all the way up. The 7 is an actual 10 on the Richter scale. And they make it confusing because they don't want you to understand how much danger. Now, radiation, the prevailing winds blow right across the ocean to North America. That's a bit of fun. I'll show you an actual model of how the wind, because this is France's model of the emissions from the nuclear meltdowns in 2011, based on 16 days. So in 16 days, this plume model, which is not based on the actual entire inventory or anything, but it covers the whole planet in radioactive fallout in just 16 days. That can't be good. Said all the species that don't exist no more. And so again, the evidence is overwhelming that they had a major event right on the coastline, but that the intensity scale on the land was significant. Obviously, this is their evidence, not mine. Okay, all right. Struck off the coast at 11:36 p.m. and by 1:30 a.m. their time, 9 hours, 8.5 hours ago, they claimed that everything was honky-dory at all the nuclear power plants, except for everywhere else there was problems, but not at the nuclear power plant. And they only tell you a depth, they don't tell you the distance off the coastline again. And I find that really frustrating because you'll get the distance and the depth everywhere else on the planet. And the quake registered an upper 6 on the 7-point Japanese seismic intensity scale in parts of Miyagi and the Fukushima prefecture. Okay. Again, you have visuals from the story, but you also have confirmations. So an upper 6 on a 7-point, upper 6 is a 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, etc., but it stops at 7, which is the max intensity scale is obviously, now reports you'll see coming up here is that people couldn't stand up. But there was no harm to probably the most vulnerable structure in the whole country. The first spot the earthquake got a strike is this nuclear power plant before it could hit anything else. But there was no damage at these fragile buildings, okay? All right? Dana, stop fear-mongering, Dana. I'm not fear-mongering, I'm just asking a question. Is it a crime to ask a question anymore? Japan's earthquake knocked out power to millions. That's a real earthquake. That's a real earthquake in 14 prefectures, which is half of Japan. And 14 prefectures is the same 14 prefectures where 55 countries banned the food for 10 years and just randomly removed all the restrictions at the same time in September of last year. What's the odds of that, I wonder? Be careful what you eat. You are what you eat. In this case, death. They reported the quake had a magnitude 7.3. Preliminary epicenters near the coast of Fukushima. The agency said the quake struck 36 miles below the sea. No immediate reports of casualties because we're only a couple of hours in at that stage. It was so powerful it shook large parts of eastern Japan, including Tokyo, where buildings shook violently. The quake was so powerful it shook places 200 kilometers away violently, but not the nuclear meltdowns right in ground zero. See, this is why I don't keep any sharp objects on my desk, because I wouldn't see a shit right now if I had a sharp object near me and just put myself out of misery. Quake struck 36 miles below the sea. Tsunami alert in Japan as earthquake strikes off the coast of Fukushima. Says a 7.3 magnitude quake struck 36 miles below the sea. Stop doing that. You got to tell us both of it. 7.3 magnitude earthquake hits the coast of Japan. This earthquake was the 2011 Japanese earthquake was a 9.1 magnitude. Why ain't that on the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 7, I wonder? Some 63 times stronger and released about 500 times more energy than Wednesday's quake. 500 times more energy. Right, so there's a big incentive because you have multiple nuclear meltdowns, not to tell you the truth, and to disenfranchise you from the facts. Magnitude 7.3 earthquake, powerful earthquake, advisories, tsunami alerts issued, quakes, 2 million homes without power, a depth of 60 kilometers below the sea. Please take action to save your life, the coward-in-chief said. Strong earthquake felt in Japan. You didn't hear that word very often, strong. It was usually powerful or massive or, stuff like that. You can see how the lights out. Powerful earthquake jolts the coastline. Oh, there's a lot more than the coastline. It was 14 prefectures. The tremor off the coast of Fukushima registered magnitude of 7.3 and as high as a 6 plus on the Japanese shaking intensity scale. Too strong for people to stand. And I really disrespect them for doing that, which is okay, I guess in one sense, but to put two of them there at one time, that's not going to confuse people. It normalizes the deception and misrepresentation and deceit. At a depth of 60 kilometers below the sea. Go on, I would never guess that. 7.3 magnitude hit the East Japan at a depth of 60 kilometers. Shortly after it hit at 11:36 p.m., which is a little over 10 hours ago, 11 hours ago probably now. Earthquake jolts Japan's northeastern coast, cuts power in Tokyo. But it done no damage, nothing, Dana, to the nuclear. Well, I got a poll tonight. Let's see if everybody agrees it done no damage. Look at that. 67 votes. 96% said, hell yeah, I can release radiation. Which is the appropriate answer, by the way. It registered as high as a 6 plus on the Japanese seismic intensity scale, shaking intensity scale. In some areas, too strong to stand up. Too strong to stand up, but it didn't shake this stuff. Come on, man. You're not even going to admit that there's a little tiny bit more radiation coming out of there? Come on. Stop being an a-hole. Get with the program. Depth of 60 kilometers. 57 kilometers off the coast. Wow. It only took us forever before someone told us how far off the coastline. But what part of the coastline? Tell me it's off the coastline doesn't really help me if you don't tell me where, specifically, exactly. Which was off the coastline of Namie. Namie is 15 kilometers north of Fukushima nuclear meltdowns themselves, the actual site. Authorities warned residents in Fukushima, Miyagi, Yamagata prefectures to expect aftershocks, which again means this is a lot bigger than a so-called 7.3. When you do the math, it's 9.4. 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. 2011 was at a depth of 18 miles, 29 kilometers, and was 45 miles off the coastline. Off the Oshika Peninsula itself, specifically, apparently. So 45 miles out and 18 miles down. This one is 45 miles out and 35 miles down. The exact same distance off the coastline, but not as deep. 7.3, and what made the Fukushima earthquake so powerful was the tectonic plate for several hundred miles let go. That displaced a huge amount of water, and then the water doing this tumbling effect over the distance created multiple tsunami waves because it travels so fast at 400 to 600 miles per hour. NHK TV reporting that a fire alarm went off at the turbine building. First off, the turbine buildings were destroyed. All 6 of them. And you can check out the videos with the documentation from TEPCO, where I had to do like a silly 5-video presentation during my playlist of the 1,900 pictures that were released in 2013 that were allegedly taken immediately, and they're all dated, and I show you the dates and headlines and pictures, and I can't find the truth in any of it. Well, I can show you the truth, but I can't find them telling you the truth, is what I'm trying to say. It's constant lies. While water pumps for the spent cooling pools at 2 of the 4 reactors at Fukushima Daiichi, the Daiichi reactor, which is 10 miles south. And the Daiichi reactor is the evil twin of Fukushima. It also had major tsunami water. It had major radioactive water. And they covered that story up. I'm not going to go down that path with you tonight, even though I should probably, but we got so much to run through. Let's keep running. Major earthquake hits Japan. No tsunami threat to Oregon. 2 million homes loses power. Again, the headline, huge. Japan earthquake triggers. Huge. There's no connotations. You don't have these connotations for 7.3, 45 miles off the coastline. It's only for a much bigger earthquake, many magnitudes bigger, which the evidence seems to suggest stronger as we go through. Around the stricken Fukushima plant, extensive decontamination. We've seen this in most stories too after the first couple of hours. That started showing up in almost every story. And this year, 5 former victims of Fukushima were tricked and deceived and manipulated into going back into the uninhabitable town. And they probably spent $50 million just to slowly push these people back into the community. 7.3 magnitude earthquake hits the coastline of Japan. It was 55 miles from that of the devastating 2011 quake. Again, but they don't give you independent documentation to show you where. You get all these different versions of where's to and everything. Shows broken walls of a department store building fall to the ground and shards of windows scattered on the street near the main train station in Fukushima City. And Fukushima City is it's around 300,000 cesium atomic decays per square meter throughout the city. And they didn't check for alpha or beta or neutron because that's what monsters do, right? And they tricked the population. They wouldn't let the population escape the nuclear industry. is now down there studying them like lab rats, which is what they done with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where they built the cities back on the nuclear meltdowns. Try wrapping, or nuclear detonations. Try wrapping your mind around that one. Try making that one up on your own. They're going to set off a nuclear weapon, going to rebuild the cities, going to study them for 76 years. My kids will get a full-time pension out of it. Your kids will get a full pension studying the victims, the lab rats. Japan hit by a 7.3 magnitude earthquake, tsunami. And they're still saying tsunami just to get you to look at the story. It was so close to the coastline, the tsunami is there right away, 8 minutes or something. The main quake was estimated to have centered about 37 miles below the seafloor, was preceded by a lesser magnitude of a 6.1, which normally would be a serious earthquake, just 2 minutes earlier. And ordinarily, 6.4 would be considered a big event, but it was quickly revealed to be a foreshock, and continued large aftershocks are likely for days. In fact, some of the stories coming up are alluding or talking about people that got hurt by the aftershocks. And there's still a very slight chance, perhaps 1 in 20 or so, which is not slight, by the way, when it comes to this stuff, that a 7.3 might be a foreshock to a larger quake in the next 3 days. So the 6.4 was a foreshock to the 7.3, which might be a foreshock to a bigger one in the next couple of days. Yeah, it doesn't get any worse than that, because you're talking about if these buildings have damage, you can start a chain reaction, and radioactive plumes that had these plutonium-239 that have covered the planet in 2011 could show up again. But don't worry, your government will be happy to lie to you and trick and deceive you and your loved ones, and make sure you get your radiation doses. Think of it as a death vaccine where it kills you eventually. Shaking in the high-intensity 6 range was observed in Fukushima and parts of the Miyagi prefecture. And obviously, the high-intensity 6 range of 7, which on the international scale is a 9.4. But it wasn't under the land like the Kyodo in 2011. But nevertheless, it shook buildings in Tokyo violently for 2 minutes. Yeah, but it didn't hurt the buildings at ground zero, Dana, where it came ashore first. I disagree. Surrounding areas saw a lower 5-point shaking, levels at a 4 on the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 7 in Tokyo, which is equal to a 6 or a 4. Hang on, I'll do the math. I'll put it up on the screen for you. Where are your two screen? So a 4, they're suggesting a lower 4. Let's do a 4.3 times a 1.43. 1.43 to get the Richter scale is a 6.1. So 6.1 in Tokyo, several hundred kilometers away, but it didn't hurt the buildings at ground zero, Dana. Okay, I'll just say it. Wait for it. Not finished. Earthquakes has a thrush mechanism. It meant one plate slipped downward under another. That's not good. Because Fukushima had these types of earthquake in 2011 before she went ba-boom, before the plate degenerated. So the maximum intensity is 6 plus. Is Japanese. The magnitude is a 7.3 is the international. And you can see the whole country shook. The entire country shook. The entire country. So 7.3 don't shake the entire country for starters. Because that's not a small country, right? And that was from a Twitter. Each increase from the officials, Each increase of 1 on the scale represents a tenfold jump in seismic moment. So when they just are so vague where they call it a lower 5 or a higher intensity scale of 5 or a lower 6, or it's very significant actually, because each one is very important. So the Fukushima nuclear plant, the earthquake epicenter. So it's very rare to get any kind of documentation like that, is what I noticed all day. So that was a really important one. Cracked walls are seen in apartment buildings at Fukushima. Horror footage shows the inside of rocking apartments as massive earthquake hits Japan. And I got some of these more videos coming up later. Video shows the inside of the apartments violently shaking. 2 million homes across Japan were left without power as 14 prefectures lost power. I showed that video earlier, actually. Panic at Fukushima nuclear plant as systems disrupted by horror earthquake. You guys are kicking ass today. I was careful not to put too salacious headlines because we're only 10 hours into the quake when I went live, right? So the moral, I'm going to end up having to do an update, no doubt, because more information will come out over the next 24 hours, 72 hours really, and they're expecting more. A fire alarm went off at the turbine buildings number 5 reactor. So the turbine buildings, I showed you that earlier. Were all broken, right? There was so much radiation ended up in those buildings. There's no way those buildings are functional because radiation contaminates all material, right? And therefore they emit also. And these were lethal dose numbers we're talking about. Meanwhile, they said no abnormalities detected at the Okinawa nuclear plant in the northeastern Miyagi prefecture. And the last place you want to buy any food from is Miyagi. Since they moved back there after they lifted no-go zones. Chernobyl no-go zones are good for at least another 22,000 years, but Fukushima is better than Chernobyl. The Tokyo Electric Power Company, which doesn't exist, was nationalized, also confirmed there's no abnormalities in radiation at or around the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant. Tell Dana to stop picking on us. Amid reports of violent shocks in the Capitol buildings. So you have violent shocks in the Capitol, but there's no releases. No releases. No, you can have violent shaking, destruction everywhere, but ground zero, the two most fragile buildings on the entire site. No issues there. Woo! Escaped another one. Must be good. I'd be buying lottery tickets if I was Tokyo, if I was that lucky. I've actually never bought a lottery ticket in my life, by the way. No fate. Japan hit by tremor prompting tsunami alert. Earthquake. The BBC. Okay. So then you had the Independent. So let's go back to BBC. Japan hit by tremor. Not massive earthquake. Not huge earthquake. Prompting a tsunami alert. At the same time, this headline came out. Japan earthquake. Tsunami waves force evacuations as bullet train derailed. Totally different headlines at the same time from the same country. So back to the Independent. The 7.3 magnitude quake off the coastline triggered a tsunami warning just days after the anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear reactor. Buildings in Tokyo shook violently and more than 2 million homes lost power, but there was no damage at the fragile nuclear power plant, Dana. Okay, I'm just saying, hang out. Larger parts of eastern Japan, excluding the ground zero, of course. Everywhere else, though, shook and rattled and rolled for what seemed like an eternity. The operators for the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant said the workers were checking for any possible damage for the earthquake. You mean the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, because TEPCO ain't there. That's fact. So they got restaurants and shops and streets where liquefaction has pushed cement blocks up. Lots of damage everywhere but ground zero. The BBC story, earthquake Japan hit by tremor. In some areas it was too forceful for people to stand. Does that sound like a tremor to anybody? That sounds like an earthquake to me. If you can't stand up, that's an earthquake. Because God help us if that's just a tremor. That's the foreshadowing of what's coming. You can't stand up. You don't want to be there when the big baby shows up. Going to drop half the country. Aftershocks were said to be possible. Not probable, but possible. They did have aftershocks that did injure people. That stuff is coming up shortly. Miyagi and Yamagachi. So that's 3 prefectures is a lot of territory, particularly when Fukushima prefecture is the 3rd biggest in the country. Japan hit by tremor. A number of people across northeastern Japan were hurt by falling objects. And in the city of Soma, local media reported one man in his 60s had died. My heart goes out to the victims. And a bullet train north of Fukushima City was also derailed. But no damage at ground zero. Stop saying damage. I can't see how that can get damaged if you have a big earthquake right there. How could that possibly look at it? It's perfect. It's perfect. I don't know what the big worry is. Why are you fear-mongering, Dana? I know, right? It makes sense to me. How's the vote going? We got 84 votes. 95% of the people actually rightfully and appropriately agree that Fukushima nuclear meltdown releases large amounts of radiation after a major earthquake, because that's how it actually works. Everybody give yourself a big pat on the back. Japan hit by a tremor. 700,000 homes without power. Yeah, it sounds like a tremor. All tremors do that, Dana. Authorities said emergency services have been inundated with calls. Tremor. 35 miles off the coast of Fukushima, not far from the epicenter of the most powerful earthquake in Japan's history. The nuclear authority, there's the biggest confusion ever uttered. Wait, what? There's a nuclear authority? Come on, man. They won't even admit to an extra atomic decay coming out of that site. Nuclear authorities have said no abnormalities were detected Wednesday night's earthquake. They're going to check several square miles in the middle of the night. The homeless, we're talking about on top of that, the heroes, the homeless. At the damage, have you actually seen pictures? We got pictures coming up of this. Epicenter of the earthquake off the coastline of Fukushima. The only word they got there is Fukushima. Not trying to tell you nothing, are they? Earthquake hit by tremor. GG Press, which caught me off guard. Several hours later, fire alarm goes off at the Fukushima number 1 plant. This was a coded message, I think. TEPCO. You know, TEPCO, the pictures you uses at the firing ranges, like me. TEPCO is checking whether any fires actually occurred in the building. What's holding you up, dog? Don't be scared, homie. The number 5 reactor is not among the 3 reactors where the meltdowns occurred. No, it's actually quite a distance away, number 5 and 6. But as I showed you earlier, why is reactor 6 blotted out? And it's the only pictures we ever got of the pump houses, too, is from that drone last year in January. The tremor, they're calling it a tremor, too. And tsunami. So I posted the video, and we had And we had 2 people said, no, Fukushima can't release radiation right away. 6 votes and only 1 thumbs up. So like we noticed since I've been here, that I don't get thumbs up after the show's over for 12, 14 hours, and then very rare. Quake shakes Eastern, so get them in while you can, folks. Quake shakes, not that I give a shit, but I'm just trying to be cute, if that's possible. Quake shakes Eastern Japan, prompting shakes Eastern Japan, and they used a picture of a major landslide, which I couldn't prove was recent, so I'm not claiming it is. That's probably an old picture, but I hope it's not real anyway. The quake, which cut power to more than 2 million homes, was centered off the coast of Fukushima region at a depth of 37 miles. Off the coast where? And exactly specifically how far? Why is that such a hard thing for the media to say about Japan, but nowhere else? Everywhere else is, it's 25 miles off the coast, 20 miles deep. Fukushima, it was about 35 miles deep, George. Where to? It was off the coast. It was a big coast. That's right, it was off the coast. The 2011 was 45 miles off the coastline and 18 miles down. The tsunami came in at 700 kilometers an hour. Try wrapping your mind around that one. 435 miles per hour, up to 10 kilometers inland. In some places, it actually went up to 20 kilometers inland, and reached heights of 133 feet. Most of the media will only tell you like 30 feet at best. In some places, it actually reached 30 feet. How many times have I come out and just tore what's left of my poor hair out? And 18 miles deep. Very shallow. It was a vicious shaking, eh? Quake hits off Japan, leaving 1 dead and reviving painful memories. 69 injured. Was there anything else there? 69 injured. And the number's gone up to over 100 now. A powerful magnitude off the coastline leaves 1 dead and 69 injured. So that's about 5 hours in or something, 6 hours in. Quake was felt in Tokyo, 275 kilometers away. "170 miles away. But it did no damage to the vulnerable, fragile reactors. All right? Okay, Dana? No damage. Look how stoic these melted reactors are. Amazing. Where the shaking of buildings was long and pronounced in Tokyo, but ground zero, stop your fear-mongering, Dana. I've been attacked by at least 25,000 trolls in the last 10 years over this. Arrested, attacked, shot at. Just before midnight, the quake hit off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture at a depth of 60 kilometers. Just off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture. Weirdo. Exactly, specifically. Please. Tell me the truth, maybe. There was no abnormalities. This is where we start seeing the Prime Minister getting quoted. So why is the Prime Minister being quoted? There was no abnormalities at the nuclear power plant. Prime Minister told the media. So leave it alone. Well, how do you know there was no damage? Did you go there yourself? How come you got damage everywhere else but at ground zero where the melted nuclear reactors are to? I can't wrap my mind around it. Prime Minister Kasha told reporters, there's no such thing as a reporter anymore, obviously, or I wouldn't have to do what I'm doing. Powerful earthquake jolts northeastern Japan. Powerful earthquake jolts northeastern Japan. Powerful earthquake shakes the country is more like it, right? That's what the evidence has showed so far. It's not a tremor. It's a powerful earthquake. Stop doing that. Hit off the northeast coast of Fukushima Prefecture, 275 kilometers northeast of Tokyo at a depth of 60 kilometers. Yeah, but how far off the coastline Pacific was it off the nuclear power plants? These are important friggin' questions, by the way. There was no abnormalities at the country nuclear power plant, the Prime Minister had said. Every story. Yeah, we had an earthquake. There was no damage to the nuclear power plant. I didn't ask you yet. It's okay, I gotta say that, or the boss will fire me. So the fire alarm was triggered at a turbine and it crippled. And I showed you the pictures. Does the building look crippled or destroyed to you? These were 190-foot buildings with multiple reactor cores stored pools at the top of the buildings. It looks perfectly normal to me, Dana. I can't tell the difference. Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant. God. That plant was devastated by a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, and following Tsunami 2011 caused a radiation leak. Does that look like a leak to anybody? That's okay. The burden of knowledge is just overwhelming sometimes. A powerful 7.3 magnitude earthquake rattles Japan. That's appropriate, right? Rattles Japan. Like physically rattles it, triggering millions of power outages. That's a real earthquake, okay? That's a badass earthquake. But in fact, it was a 9.4, not a 7.3. A massive, and see, massive and 7.3 don't go together. Now, if you have a 7.3 on land under your city, that's a real earthquake. And it's particularly if it's shallow, right? This is not on land and under your feet. This is 45 miles off the coast, 35 miles down. It was a 9.4, obviously. Because they call it an upper 6, and Japanese seismic intensity scale is 7. The powerful earthquake struck 39 miles below the sea. They can't make up their mind, can they? In fact, they upgraded it to a 7.4 just before it went live. AOL. Hello there, AOL. Didn't even know you existed anymore. The USGS pinpointed the epicenter of the quake to be located 35.4 miles, 57 kilometers east of Namie. What? AOL got the scoop. You go, dog. That's rad. Well, that's Namie. Namie. And that's Fukushima right there. I'll do a better job of it. Oh, I did. I put a boat on the map for you, the little black circles. It's around 15 kilometers. And where my chest is, right here, is 55 miles off the coastline. That's right on the fault line of the 2011. They're both on the coastline, and there's about 15 kilometers apart. So it's roughly right here, say, right there. Which, that's the nuclear meltdowns are right there. So I went through an absurd amount of news, and I didn't show it all to you because I didn't screen capture everything, trying to find out where the frig this thing was. It was mind-numbing for hours. And I got a text message going, Japan, earthquake, yeah. I was just getting back to the house, and I was only a couple of minutes away, so I jumped in and checked into it, and sure enough, I was like, whoo, that's something. I better dig into that one. 9 hours later, we're telling the story. 2 aftershocks left at least 7 people hurt. 2 aftershocks. So 7.3 is not going to have massive aftershocks, but a 9.4 is, baby. You better believe it. 2 aftershocks left at least 7 people hurt as emergency crews responded to multiple reports of injuries, fires, structural damage, and Minnesota, which is where you don't ever want to have a picnic or eat or even fly over, and Fukushima. So what we notice with Japan only is the truth comes out in increments over the next week. There could be multiple nuclear meltdowns going on. There's zero possibility you're going to hear about it in the media. It's zero. It'll slowly start to find its way out. Then we got to verify everything. And the truth will come out because what we gathered up so far tells the story. You got to read between the lines, obviously, because it's blatant lies. I mean, to suggest you got all this damage going on, but there's no damage at ground zero, where the earthquake had to go shoot past this to beat the shit out of the rest of the country. Because this is deadly for the entire planet. The radioactive fallout is real. This is not a game. This is not imagination. And I've done multiple research expeditions for 6 years in the Pacific Ocean for 4 to 5 months a year doing species counts because of the radioactive fallout from Japan. This is not a game. I'm a bit of a game. I wish I played games, but I don't, unfortunately. I work. Around 2.2 million homes across 14 prefectures, including Tokyo, were experiencing blackouts. AOL got the scoop on all of this, didn't they? I didn't even know they existed anymore. It was amazing. And then he showed a picture of 2 train station employees helping a lady. AOL, not even a class, baby. TEPCO, which also operates the Fukushima nuclear plant, said workers found no abnormalities at the site. And TEPCO received reports the water pumps at the spent fuel storage pools at 2 of the reactor buildings had stopped functioning. I believe that was in Daiichi nuclear power plant. The Daiichi nuclear, let's quickly look at the Daiichi nuclear power plant, just to give you some context of previous headlines. I don't know if I can find it. Just give me a second. The system. Oh, there it is. Daiichi after the quake, but before the tsunami. Yeah, let's just blast through this little set. To give you context of the Daiichi at the tsunami. 14 nuclear reactors at 4 sites went in the station blackout, which is the worst case scenario where you have no external power and you can't get your generators up and running. It means you're headed to a quick meltdown. You got about 50 minutes before it starts melting down. Once it gets to 5 or 6%, you can't turn the clock back. And there's a lot of people who suggest you can't turn it back once it starts because the zirconium cladding of the fuel is burning. It burns very high temperatures, and there's so much radiation in gamma shines and X-rays and neutron bursts that you can't get close to the buildings to resolve it. But everything was underwater at these Daiichi plants. We were focused on ensuring Unit 4 is kept in a stable condition and fixing the 3 other units. So they're suggesting 4 reactors were in desperation mode. TEPCO president mentioned accident at Fukushima Daiichi, not just the Daiichi. The bottom of the Daiichi reactor may be broken through, and rumors of an explosion, which were quantified, because we covered this years ago, after it happened, particularly, still receiving lots of radioactive fallout from the Fukushima Daiichi. So you can blame the radiation in the area on Daiichi, because it was, and cover up the Fukushima, because the cover up for both of them was in full steam ahead. Smoke seen rising from Fukushima Daiichi after the quake, but before the tsunami. In reactor 1 in the Daiichi plant melted down before the tsunami showed up. Damage was caused by the quake separating, because the coastline dropped by 6 feet and moved to the east 6 feet. And what happened was you disconnected the intake of the water, and they need 1 million gallons a minute, 4,500 tons of water a minute to keep the reactors functional, or they run away. And once they melt down, they're going to get up to 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. They'll consume steel and rebar and water and everything else, and atomize and aerosol, ionize and radiate it, and release that in the massive aerosol plumes that happen to look like that, because that's the model of it, covering the entire planet in just a couple of weeks. The Daiichi had also major damage, submerged under 4 meters of water. So 12 feet of water is 14 plus psi, pounds per square inch, applied to all the equipment on top of that. But we know that the pump houses, which are necessary for pumping water, those reactors were running, right? Same as the Fukushima reactors. My insights showed me there was definitely some melter reactors, if not multiple melter reactors. Donnie worker needed emergency room after being at Unit 4, which meant you had an event that they got irradiated. Unable to decontaminate exposed people, which meant you had some kind of meltdown for sure. Whether it was the reactor or the fuel pool, it looks like the world will never know. The industry is incredibly deceitful, dishonest, disingenuous. Fukushima Daiichi had 3,000 tons of radioactive water in the reactor buildings. So in other words, what I'm showing you was Daiichi had a lot of issues, right? Authorities have warned residents in Fukushima, Yamagata, Miyagi prefectures to expect aftershocks. A powerful quake rattles Japan. The Associated Press, Mari Yamaguchi, we covered that earlier. But she did sign on to a couple of articles. She doesn't write them. She puts her name on them. And she's been around for 11 years with propaganda. She's the Associated Press and Mari Yamaguchi are the cover stories. And then all the other media, spider bots, will aggregate those stories. So you get the same pictures, the same headlines, the same author at the same time worldwide at 1,700. No medias. They'll aggregate out to all of their spider bots. Japan Nuclear Regulation Authority said the fire alarm went off at the turbine building at number 5 reactor, which is really interesting. So number 5, which was supposed to be in good shape, had damage, but a few hundred feet away, destroyed buildings had no damage. Miracle, Dana, it was a miracle. Urged residents in the affected area to use extra caution for possible major aftershocks for about a week. For about a week. Oh man, that's a long time. Just keep burning through this stuff. Powerful earthquake jolts northeastern Japan. That's half the country, see? That's a powerful earthquake. It's appropriate to call it powerful. How can you go past these destroyed reactors and jolt the rest of the country and you can't, no damage, no releases from these fragile buildings? I say that's a miracle, you ask me. Powerful earthquake. No, nobody's putting this earthquake in any other context. Or the tremor. I hate that word, by the way. Quake hits Japan. Fukushima leaving 1 dead. We've seen that got regurgitated. 69 injured. There was no abnormalities at the nuclear power plants, says the Prime Minister. Why is the Prime Minister commenting on nuclear power plants? So we counted the tanks. They don't have 1,000 tanks, as I showed you earlier. It's actually 750. There's another little shaking at the airport. So that was up in Sendai Airport, I guess. So you got Sendai Airport shaking the daylights, but no damage at the nuclear reactor 3 and reactor 4. There's multiple reactors there. I'm actually going to show you them before the show's over here. Powerful quake rattles Japan. Japan. 7.3 magnitude earthquake preceded 2 minutes before by smaller 6.4 magnitude, also off the coastline. The video taken by a Twitter user shows shaking in an apartment which they say was located in Koriyama. This is about 35 miles away from the reactors. Inland, behind the reactors, is highly radioactive, by the way, and was on the second reactor. The Fire and Disaster Management Agency said 2 people were killed, and my heart goes out to the victims, and 94 others were injured, including 4 seriously. The agency also upgraded the magnitude of the quake from 7.4 to an initial 7.3. And the footage shows the walls broken of a department store building fell to the ground. On the streets in the main train station in Fukushima City, 36 miles west of the coastline, way inside, way interior. And the earthquake had to go past the nuclear meltdowns that are going to be dangerous for 1 million years and never done no damage. Buddy, that's a miracle. I ever heard of one. What do you think? What's your opinion? Let's check it out here. Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? 334 counts a minute right there at that time. Can Fukushima nuclear meltdowns release large amounts of radiation after a massive earthquake? We got 97 votes, and 95% of the people got a prize for getting the answer right. And the first place prize is 5 buckets of horse manure. You got to bring your own lids. It's the best growing fertilizer on the planet. I apologize for my dark humor. The Fire and Disaster said 2 were killed and 94 were injured. Footage also showed furniture, appliances smashed to the floors at apartments in Fukushima. And that cosmetic and other merchandise at convenience stores fell from the shelves in Yokohama near Tokyo. So you got damage all the way up to Tokyo, but no damage at ground zero. Don't worry, scientists will come out and explain that away in the near future. They'll come out and say, it was a miracle. There was a miracle, that's why. Again, fire alarm went off the turbine building, number 5. Because they ain't talking about reactor 1, well, they do, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, a little bit. Water pumps for the spent cooling pool at 2 of the 4 reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi briefly stopped. So Daiichi had damage, but not the Fukushima fragile reactors. But 10 kilometers further south, towards Tokyo, power is restored, except for about 37 homes in the hardest hit areas of Fukushima and Miyagi. The hardest hit areas are Fukushima and Miyagi. But no damage at ground zero where the earthquake came ashore. Praise the Lord, man. The hardest hit Fukushima Miyagi prefecture. Look at this picture here. I like this. It's one of my favorite ones today. Notice how the earthquake actually overlaps the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant. And it shook Tokyo. Shook Tokyo way the frig up there, but it didn't hurt the nuclear meltdowns at ground zero. Hallelujah. Because this is what the building, they got covers over these buildings, but you can never physically touch the building. It's a lethal dose. Just trying to get, we call them Medusa, because if you get close enough to look at them, you die. TEPCO. The major Japan apologist media came out with a TEPCO story. No abnormalities found at the crippled. Does these buildings look crippled to somebody? Is anybody that gullible anymore? Maybe, you never know, Dana. It's easy when you haven't got the evidence, when you don't supply the evidence to say shit like that. I can't say crap like that and get away with it, because everybody's like, he shows the evidence for everything else, why didn't he show it that time? No abnormalities found at crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. Tokyo Electric Power Company, which doesn't even exist anymore, was nationalized, said no abnormalities were found as of 1:30 a.m. It happened at 11:36 p.m., so 90 minutes before that it happened. At nighttime, on a skeleton crew of homeless and destitute and victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. That's fascinating. I think it's fascinating. We're almost getting through this stuff, aren't we? Now, roll. You gotta roll. Keep it going here. TEPCO said cooling equipment at the plant in the Fukushima prefecture. Utility observed no changes in the measurement of radioactivity monitoring post and radioactive dust monitors in the plant's compound. I haven't got time to take you through how big the numbers are actually on site are. But nuclear scientists won't go to that site. Let's put it that way. Or any other discipline. TEPCO said the water levels temporarily dropped in the tank connected to the spent fuel storage pool of the number 2 reactor. Because they're planning on pretending they're getting the fuel out of the number 2 fuel pool. So they seized upon this and claimed that the water tanks at the number 2 reactor building dropped slightly. This is madness. Let's go backwards for a minute. Damage at Unit 2 is what prompted TEPCO to discuss evacuating the Fukushima workers in 2011. Perhaps because the reactors burned continuously for several days. Continuously means 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. The fuel pools don't have a containment, which translates into is that they were also destroyed. In fact, this study always cracks me up. I'll use it tonight. Land contamination activity data interpretation from Fukushima Daiichi accident. They blamed all the radiation fallout. The local contamination measured at the Fukushima Daiichi site is mainly caused by aerosol releases from Unit 2. Now, of course, there was Unit 3 and 4, but Unit 2 is the one that caused the damage, he said. Not these two bad, crazy planet killers. Fukushima radiation will poison food for decades. Never that headline. Forgot about that one. Explosion at Reactor 1 reportedly caused by damage from the quake. We talked about that earlier. So I'll show you the reactors, all 4 of the reactors in particular. Anytime you're ready, reactor. This is Reactor 1. I'm going to show you the detonation of Reactor 1. So the buildings you see in there, the buildings are 190 feet high. Let's watch that detonation one more time. So that's the reactor core detonating and the fuel pools. So when the fuel pools start to lose water, the rods are exposed. The cover of the rods is what's known as zirconium. When zirconium is exposed to air, it will melt, and then it'll catch fire immediately, and that will incinerate the rest of it. That will help evaporate the water. The rest of the fuel starts catching fire. It doesn't care if there's water now. It'll just burn in the water like lava does in the ocean. It'll evaporate all the water. It'll detonate. Now, water, when it comes in contact with the zirconium cladding in the air and stuff like this, you create the hydrogen, which is extremely volatile, as you've seen, obviously. This is Reactor 1, 1 million sieverts per hour outside the building. So 5 to 10 sieverts is a lethal dose pretty quick, a few minutes. 1 million sieverts is a lethal dose from 1,000 feet away. Tokyo may have been contaminated when radioactive plume fell to the ground after Unit 2 core was exposed. And this is Unit 2, which they're now claiming they're getting fuel out of a pool that actually doesn't exist. And they even admit it, right, in this documentation. New TEPCO data unequivocally shows ongoing criticalities at Unit 2. Potential global catastrophe from Fukushima Unit 2 highly radioactive fuel. The reactor could be destroyed. And this is a plume model from all the reactors, but based on venting, not based on the actual nuclear meltdowns. Covers the whole planet in radioactive fallout. Unit 2 completely liquefied. In order for that to happen, you're going super criticality, 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. The fuel pool's right above it now. And so if you boil a pot of water, you put a pot of water on a campfire, what happens? If you just walk away and you keep putting wood on the fire, the water boils off, right? This happens exponentially quicker. The government reports that if Fukushima containment vessels were damaged, that Tokyo would be voluntarily evacuated from the... Now this is reactor 3 detonation. And this, the big chunks now you're going to see start falling back to the earth are the reactor cores and the fuel pools falling back down to the earth. The fuel pool is full of decades of reactor cores. It's actually the worst case scenario, and that particular building was the mixed oxide building where they used reclaimed uranium, reclaimed plutonium from nuclear missiles, and older nuclear fuel. Now the only thing left of the building is a stump. So when the government reports that a Fukushima containment vessel was damaged, Tokyo, 36 million people would be voluntarily evacuated several hundred kilometers away. Well, guess what? It was lost. They should have evacuated Tokyo. Because there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries from radiation, not just cancer. Cancer is typically latent. And so this part of the plume model is after about 19 days, this one right here. After 19 days in that model, the whole planet is covered in radioactive fallout. But these reactors didn't stop melting or emitting after 19 days. So that's reactor 3 depiction over there. In comparison, it should look the same as reactor 2. So the inventories are stored at the top of the buildings in what's known as fuel pools. And these are the reactor cores runs up. It's always kept on water. That was reactor 3 to your left. So Tokyo should have been evacuated because of containment, obviously, and decades of reactor cores, which dwarfs Chernobyl by maybe 1,000. AP journalists felt the explosion from reactor 3 25 miles away. But this is the official picture. They want you to believe that it's all okay and they got the fuel out of the pool. They can't get the fuel out of the pool because the pool doesn't exist. There's only a stump left, see? So reactor 4 is the last one I'm going to show you. Doomsday-like radiation releases. Doomsday-like radiation releases. If the fire in the pool at Unit 4 would be a global catastrophe. Well, the fuel pool, if you had a fire in the pool, it'd be a global catastrophe. That's reactor 4, what's left of it. This is what it should look like. So we have a global catastrophe. And again, here's another model from France again of the radioactive fallout. This is what they mean by a global catastrophe. Radiation goes right around the entire planet very quickly, but it didn't stop. It didn't slow down. So that's a 16-day model of radiation covering the entire planet. This is the official picture claiming they're getting fuel out of the pool. Right? So when they talk about getting the fuel out of the pool, number 2 reactor in the story today, It's 100% lie. They took advantage of...
The Japanese are very tidy people.
I apologize for that. Helen Callicott was asked about, is that the real fuel pool or is this the real one? And here's what... Now, she wrote 14 books as an anti-nuclear.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But it doesn't. It can't. It doesn't exist. You can't just build a new pool and say you're getting fuel out of a pool when the pool doesn't even exist. That's the cover story, and they cover it up on you. And here's another example of it. This is a 1 minute. Listen to these journalists pretending they're on a fuel pool in a building to your left that actually doesn't even exist.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them out.
This is madness, right? So that's just for many journalists on major TVs worldwide. Every media done this, by the way. Try to convince you they're in a building that don't exist. Map shows Fukushima fallout in the United States, and the doses in the Northeast and Great Lakes were equal to the West Coast. In fact, this is an actual study of the plume showing up, of the xenon-133 will burn a hole through your lung or the bird's lung or insects or animals' lungs and sequester into the bones. And it'll start mutating stem cells if it gets into the pelvis. Xenon-133 in Washington was 450,000 times above detection levels and persisted for weeks. This is an actual model of the Xenon-133. The model eventually covers the whole planet, see? So when they say they're getting the spent fuel pool of Reactor 2, the water dropped in the tanks, they're setting you up for a lie because that don't actually exist. It said it plans to start recovery work after confirming there was no abnormalities or water leakage in the tanks. Because they were allegedly going to start taking fuel out of a pool like they did with the fake Reactor 4 and the fake Reactor 3. Now they're going to fake it and allegedly do the same thing with Reactor 1. And that picture up in the corner is the heat signature of the building. So the whole building was destroyed. The company, aka TEPCO, also said 5 alarms were activated. Fire alarms were activated at turbine building number 5 reactor. TEPCO also said water pumps in spent fuel storage pools in the Fukushima Daiichi plant. I showed you that stuff earlier. Briefly stopped working. So that's the cover story. Obviously there was damage there. Otherwise they wouldn't be wasting their time trying to build a straw man like that. See? Earthquake light appears in the skies above the Japanese city. I showed you that video earlier. A powerful quake rattles Japan's Tsunami Advisory. This is 8-9 hours later. They're still talking about the tsunami, which only takes 8 minutes to reach the coastline. You're loving media. It's the distractions. Says why they've done that. Pumps for the cooling pool storing spent fuel at separate plants in Fukushima, Okinawa, and Miyagi temporarily stopped operating at some reactors, but were being quickly restored. The country's nuclear watchdog, which is the insiders get those jobs. They're actual goblins. The country goblins said. Evacuation orders were issued in some northeastern towns and Miyagi, opening shelters in official buildings. And around the stricken Fukushima plant, extensive decontamination has been carried out. We've seen that over and over and over and over, and I didn't bother screen capture it because I was focusing on trying to figure out where it was actually to, specifically. And that took about 5 hours of non-stop scouring the internet. It's got to be out there somewhere. I'll find it. Japan hit by a 7.3 magnitude earthquake. It was estimated to have centered around 37 miles below the seafloor. Was preceded by a lesser magnitude 6.4 earthquake 2 minutes earlier. And ordinarily a 6.4 would be considered a big event. So that was alarm because you had a 6.4 which shook the country. Obviously it was a higher. And then the 7.3 which was obviously a 9.4 because it was the upper intensity scale is 6 on Japanese Shindo scale. So it's very confusing even for me, and I'm at this all the time. Warned people to pay close attention to seismic activity and rain because of the increased risk of home collapses and sediment-related disasters. And the earthquake had a thrust mechanism we talked about earlier. It means one plate slips down underneath the other tectonic plates. And they're responsible for producing the most significant tsunamis. Because if they slip all the way, then they displace for hundreds of miles, amazing amount. But as it was, when you look at the whole country is shaking, the entire country is shaking. Japan hit by a 7.3 magnitude earthquake. Again, the models are directly off Fukushima, but now we know this was straight out off the coastline of Fukushima. It was a high intensity 6 on Japanese in scale of 7. So when you scale it up into a 10, you got to multiply it by 1.43 in order to get the Richter scale. And parts from it was a high intensity 6, which is a 6.6, 6.7, 6.8, or 6.9 out of a 7 in Fukushima and parts of the Miyagi prefecture, but it done no damage to ground zero, did it? There's 4 reactors that we're worried about. One of them is for sure going to go into a chain reaction, a criticality that could last for years. And that we've shown you, they've covered this up for many years. And that the emissions will exterminate large populations of insects and birds, mammals and animals, and as it works its way up the food chain to us. But Japan is growing food in the nuclear wasteland and shipping the food to you. Canada only had restrictions for 93 days, 3 months, 3 days, and lifted all restrictions without any paperwork or nothing. Just go ahead and poison the Canadians. We don't care. TEPCO confirms, and that's what you're seeing in Canada. Everybody's sick now. TEPCO confirms there was a fire alarm in Fukushima Daiichi. No fire was located. Electricity was out briefly at a spent fuel pool, which stores spent fuel from nuclear reactors, the agency announced. The last paper we're going to listen to is TEPCO. Tsunami alert cancelled after big quake near Fukushima. It has so far detected no abnormalities at the nuclear power plant. Right away, right? Every story, you're going to see that in every single story. And I'm going to talk about no damage to the oil plants, no damage to the coal plants, no damage to the gas plants. Looks like we're getting there. A powerful. So the 7.3 is actually a 9.4. The shaking lasted more than 2 minutes. It shook buildings violently several hundred kilometers away. Magnitude 7.3. So the official story is in full gear. Nuclear power plants were under inspections early Tuesday. Now they're talking about 9 hours later. That's the tsunami wall. And they actually have one spot down there where the wall is 70 feet high. It's madness. Japan's nuclear regulation authorities inspected several nuclear power plants. Well, you need 100 people to go in and quantify that assertment. Tsunami alert cancelled after the big quake near Fukushima as of 1 a.m. Thursday, and which is 90 minutes after, because the earthquake happened 11:36 p.m. Japan time. So 1 a.m. Japan time is just 90 minutes. So they can't go in and make an assessment in 90 minutes at multiple nuclear meltdown with huge contamination. They got at the Fukushima plant. They actually got 6 places in Pacific where the earth is cracked from the China syndrome hitting the water tables. The water expands, like a liter of water expands 1,200 foot. So you can imagine 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, 1,000 tons of molten uranium lava striking a water table, splits the earth. In this case was in 6 places. That the steam coming up where the site disappears, they abandoned the site. The Geiger counters were only able to read 10 sieverts per hour, were all maxed out. You can't go there. That's a lethal dose immediately anywhere on the site from the steam. And you need certain conditions to actually see it too, right? That's why there's no nuclear scientist ever goes to Fukushima. And then they talk about the plant's been undergoing enormous cleanup since the disaster. So they took advantage of the story to come out and play down every facet of Fukushima instead of talking about the earthquake, when it happened right in front of the actual buildings that are already fragile. Water pumps for spent fuel cooling pools at a separate power plant in Fukushima were down early Thursday. This is more of a distraction, most likely, and to build a straw man story for Reactor 2 in the near future. The quake left millions of Japanese without power, but the Prime Minister said Tokyo Electric was expected to be able to quickly restore service. The heroes are coming. The devastating tsunami that crippled. The buildings are not crippled. The buildings are destroyed. I can't tell the difference, Dana. The Fukushima Daiichi plant 11 years ago, Japan, was a formidable challenge. How does a quake, tsunami-prone island nation dotted with nuclear reactors protect against another calamity? To quell lingering fear, Japan's nuclear regulators in recent years have ordered a flurry of new safety measures. The Hamoka nuclear power plant is perched on the Pacific coast, West Tokyo, with walls 72 feet high, among the tallest in the country. Then came the bad news. Scientists working on a new projection of potential tsunamis in the region warned last year waves can reach 74 feet. But the 2011 was 133 feet high. The 2-foot shortfall, along with the continued local opposition, has prevented the nuclear power plant from passing safety inspections. These are disease factories, eh? They're always hemorrhaging radiation 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Despite the energy crunch that has gripped Japan, opposition to a swift reopening of nuclear power plants remains strong. Thank goodness. Earthquake jolts Japan's northeast coast. Jolts the coast. So 1 dead, 69 injured in that story. It was actually 275 kilometers away. Shook. The buildings were long and pronounced. But ground zero, where the earthquake came ashore, the multiple melted reactors, everything was hunky-dory, Dana. Nuclear is so wonderful. Oh, carbon-free, clean, and green. Makes me proud to be a human. So proud. How's our poll going? We're getting there, are we? Can Fukushima nuclear meltdown release large amounts of radiation after a massive earthquake? At a stunning 112 votes and 95%. Can Fukushima release large plumes like this again? Because these are the Fukushima plumes of neptunium-239, which is a bone seeker. Yummy leukemia. And covers the planet in radiation in just a couple of weeks. So you get all these different isotopes. And I have a lot of models, a lot of studies of the actual fallout. The numbers are just unbelievable. There was no abnormalities at the nuclear power plant, the Irish Times, bootlicking, nuclear bootlicking. We covered the Irish Times many times over the year. Probably 30 times a year each year we cover the Irish Times. Because they got UK submarine fleet over there and nuclear missiles, so they're the real bootlickers, eh? One dead as earthquake strikes Japan's coast. No abnormalities at the nuclear power plants, the Prime Minister. You think that's not brainwashing? And then distract you with a fire somewhere else that wasn't a fire. Security footage shows homes shaken in Miyagi. And then you got to go right past multiple nuclear meltdowns to shake the homes that are built for earthquakes, by the way, and are not fragile like these bad boys. Japan says nuke plant undamaged, and a headline no less, because it's damaged. You really want me to believe that that's undamaged? You really want me to believe that's undamaged? It won't go in the ocean. It goes up in the air. It burns. It doesn't burn. It burns and covers the planet in radioactive fallout. I got endless models. One of my favorite models because it really tells the story is the 16-day model. It doesn't go. It goes in the ocean area, right? Covers the ocean. It contaminates all the oceans and all the planet, and that's 16 days. It's a 16-day radioactive fallout model from 2011. And then we got the studies showing it actually showed up at over 220 million atoms per liter sustained in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Northern Hemisphere. Regulators did not detect any spike in radiation levels at the nuclear plant. That 3 minutes after the story breaks, that's going to be in the story. 3 minutes. We've been doing this for years. Every story has to say those sentences or they don't get paid. The fatality occurred in Soma, Fukushima. There's supposed to be 3 dead up to 10 hours ago. Refrigeration system at its Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant. The Prime Minister said regulators detected no significant irregularities. And so that's pure brainwashing, yeah? Road signs are swaying. All the evidence showed everything else was damaged and swaying, and the fragile buildings can't handle a fraction of what we're seeing everywhere else. And in order for this to happen, it's got to go right past that first. And Tokyo, which is shaken violently 270 kilometers away from ground zero where this is to, where it comes to shore rather. And one more to go. The death toll from the earthquake in central Japan rises to 33 and at least 88 injured. But just before I went live, I was reading that around 100 was confirmed at 10 hours. At 10 hours. So that's a big earthquake. And we're going to end the poll here in a moment. And that was a mad dash to get through 8 hours of the hunt today to find out what the hell was going on. And so we have a pretty accurate depiction of what happened, obviously. And that's the problem. When it comes to telling the truth, you can't rush it. So Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, and let's close the poll. The poll is going to end on 114 votes. Can Fukushima nuclear meltdowns release large amounts of radiation after a massive earthquake? And the correct answer is yes. I'll close that down in a few moments here. Make sure that gets out to you guys in case you want to click it. I'll give it an extra 30 seconds on my end. And I'll ask people to give me a thumbs up under the video to help spread facts and documentation. And so something happened, and I'll follow up on this story tonight and tomorrow. We'll do another show tomorrow with all the major updates, and I won't have to run you through all the stuff we did today, because today was to figure out what the hell is going on, where it's to, and now we got a good handle on it. We know how to aggregate the good information. So the show tomorrow night will be probably, hopefully nothing else is going on down there, but we'll see. Because that's the best we can do, right? So I'm going to end the poll on 115 votes. Thank you, everybody. We got 87 likes to end the poll. So hugs for everybody. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow, if that's possible, depending on where you're to. I'm going to be back tomorrow night with another update on this. And so there's an awful lot of discrepancies, and we had to flush all the propaganda out the best we could, right? Because you're limited to what you could do. James Lucid, wonder if anyone was jacked into the metaverse while this was going on. They were, and they will be. That's the future, is to stick a helmet on your head and disappear from reality. Albert and Patrick, Richard Ayers, yeah, Dennis, Chet Austin, good night, everybody. Starlight, I'm probably not going to get through. Port Angeles, Rabbit, Andrew B. Well, maybe I will, actually. Anybody's trying to convince you there's only going to release tritium from the tanks, don't even understand, or it's propaganda, one or the other. They're not regulars around here. They would know the difference. Yeah, good night, folks. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's worth watching the video. There's a lot of information. It'll get you up to speed. Wolf Mango, Darren James, John Curtis, and Victor. Christopher. Good night, everybody. Terry. I'm just scrolling through the names. Stephen Young. Hugs for Stephen. Yeah, it doesn't look good at all, does it? You might get another update in the next early tomorrow morning, just a quick one if there's something significant. Catch ya. So check back if you get a chance. Victor, nuke plants, mass killing machines, yeah. It's your all-girl Eden. The ice wall would have protected the power plant. Unfortunately, no. Doesn't work that way. And if I miss anybody, my apologies. Seems I wasn't gonna do a shooter, but now I'm doing a shooter, so Let's keep going through it. I know that Fukushima is not a game. Excuse me. I'm just going to run through Wolfman. I said hi to her already. Patrick, I'm just doing a quick shout out at this stage. We're already through the show for anybody. And Shayla White, good night, everybody. I think we're almost through there. I'm going to just scroll down to the most recent comments. Kevin Blanche. I came by. Blue Jay, Peaceware, Thinker, Port Angeles, David Allen, Don Vincent. Woo, lots of people tonight. R. Lee, blessings. I'm just trying to get through everybody quickly. Looks like I did. Not that quick. I'm just... Jeff Poor. Okay, that's it for me. That's all I got in me tonight. So that's 10 hours straight for me from the time I started till now. Woo! Now we know that they had a major event very close to the reactors that damaged a country in a 270-kilometer radius, but not ground zero where the multiple nuclear meltdowns are too. Gotcha. Amazing. Only in Japan. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody, hopefully, tomorrow night. Thinker. Yeah. Good night, everybody. Take care. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. God bless.
Ja.